Thank you. Hi, everyone. It's truly an honor to have this opportunity to speak with all of you from Student for Liberty. First of all, I want to introduce myself a little bit. I was born and raised in Beijing. I attended university in Canada and Hong Kong, majoring in East Asian studies. And then I worked as a journalist in Hong Kong and Beijing, covering various political and social issues related to China. And a few years ago, I decided to settle in Toronto, Canada. At the same time, I started my YouTube channel, producing political commentary content in Mandarin, and I just started in English. It's been a rewarding experience engaging with viewers worldwide and discussing critical global issues. Can you see the screen I share here?
Yes.
To understand the tension between Taiwan and China today, we must start with some history. Okay. For centuries, Taiwan was a home to indigenous peoples and later became a target of foreign powers. Now let me start with a fun fact. The Portuguese were the first Europeans to reach Taiwan in 16th century, naming it Formosa, meaning beautiful island. So as a Portuguese, some of you could say that Taiwan was once part of your country too. And your ancestors were here long before the Chinese Qing dynasty ever claimed the island. But unlike Chinese, I don't see any of you demanding Taiwan back or threatening military action over it. This brings me to China's reasoning for claiming Taiwan as a so-called inseparable part of China since ancient times. In fact, after the Portuguese, the Dutch, and the Spanish came in the 17th century. It wasn't until 1683 that Qing dynasty from mainland China occupied Taiwan by force. So the argument that Taiwan was always been the part of China doesn't really hold up, especially considering how many powers, including the Portuguese, had a presence there long before. Taiwan remained part of Qing dynasty until 1895 when it was ceded to Japan after the China's defeat in the First Sino-Japanese War. Taiwan was under Japanese rule for another 50 years, and after Japan's defeat in the World War II in 1945, the Republic of China took over Taiwan. But the key moment here we need to focus on is the Chinese Civil War in the early 20th century, which set the stage for the tensions we see today. Initially, the Republic of China, ROC, was widely recognized by the international community, including the United Nations and the United States, as a legitimate government of China. This was primarily because ROC, founded by the Nationalist Party, Kuomintang, or KMT, there are a lot of different names, had been established well before the Chinese Civil War, and the Chiang Kai-shek's government continued to assert sovereignty over all of China, claiming authority over the former Qing dynasty territories. However, following the Chinese Civil War, the situation changed drastically. The Nationalist Party, Kuomintang or KMT, led by Chiang Kai-shek, lost the war to Chinese Communist Party, CCP, led by Mao Zedong. The Kuomintang fled to Taiwan in 1949, taking control of the island from Japan, and their rule was only limited to Taiwan and a few other small islands. Meanwhile, the Communist Party established the People's Republic of China, PRC, on the mainland, governing a population of over 500 million people compared to just a few million in Taiwan at that time. So here's the critical point. The world couldn't ignore the massive population and the growing global influence of the PRC. By the 1970s, as the Cold War intensified, it became clear that the international community had to choose between recognizing the ROC, which now only governed Taiwan, or the PRC, which controlled the entire mainland and had a far greater geopolitical importance in terms of fighting Soviet Union during the Cold War. The population difference alone made this an easy decision for most countries. If they had to choose one government to represent China, the world's largest country by population, the obvious choice was the PRC. So in 1971, the United Nations passed Resolution 2758, which officially recognized the PRC as the legitimate representative of China and replaced the ROC in the UN. It was not about Taiwan itself, it was about which government would represent China on the world stage. As a result, the ROC lost its seat in UN, and many countries, including the US, eventually shifted their diplomatic recognition to PRC, while maintaining informal ties with Taiwan through mechanisms like Taiwan Relations Act, which allows the US government to continue to provide weapons and military aid to Taiwan to keep Taiwan independent from China. You will often see US naval ships passing through the Taiwan Strait as a signal to China that the US is still watching closely. Now fast forward to today. Taiwan is a thriving democracy, but it faces some pretty intense challenges. Taiwan's journey to democracy was long and difficult, filled with significant struggles and sacrifices. I have a book in my hand right now, given to me by the president of Taiwan's Legislative Yuan during my visit early this year. This is called Taiwan's Long Walk to Freedom of Speech. This book tells me the stories of how so many people were imprisoned, how countless books and newspapers were banned, and how the fight for freedom of speech in Taiwan is a history written in blood and tears. Taiwan's people had to fight hard for the basic freedoms they enjoy today, and it wasn't easy. Facing domestic pressures from dissidents and the business sector, as well as external pressure from the United States, the national government in Taiwan lifted martial law in 1987, paving the way for political opposition and setting the stage for democratization. By 1996, Taiwan held its first direct presidential election, making a significant milestone in its democratic evolution. And all these efforts have paid off. Today, Taiwan ranks the #1 full democracy in Asia, 10th in the world. Taiwan also tops the Human Freedom Index in Asia, ranked 12th globally by The Economist. These rankings reflect Taiwan's impressive social and political pluralism and dedication to human rights. It's a true testament to the resilience of its people. But it's not just about democracy. Taiwan is also a leader in many other areas. It ranks as 14th richest country in the world and the 6th richest nation in Asia by GDP per capita. When it comes to healthcare, Taiwan is a shining example, ranking #1 in the world, surpassing Japan and South Korea for 6 consecutive years and placing at the top among 94 countries globally. However, from China's perspective, though, Taiwan is still a breakaway province, and reunification is the end goal. China's so-called One China principle says Taiwan is a part of China, and they haven't been shy about saying that they'll use force if necessary to bring Taiwan back. For a while, they've been pushing a one country, two systems model, similar to what they did with Hong Kong. But after seeing how things went in Hong Kong, most people in Taiwan were very against that idea. Taiwan is watching China's treatment of Hong Kong closely. In 2019, mass protests erupted in Hong Kong in response to a proposed extradition bill, which many saw as a threat to cities' autonomy. China's crackdown was severe, with high-profile arrest of pro-democracy activists like Joshua Wong and Jimmy Lai. The imposition of national security law in 2020 essentially ended the freedoms that were promised to Hong Kong under the one country, two systems model. For Taiwan, this is a warning of what could happen if they were to accept reunification under the same terms. Then there is a military threat. China has been wrapping up military exercise near Taiwan, flying planes into Taiwan's air defense zone, and showing off its naval force. Taiwan, on the other hand, is doing everything it can to strengthen its defense and is still under constant pressure. On the top of that, China has been aggressive in isolating Taiwan on the global stage. Over the years, they've convinced more and more countries to stop recognizing Taiwan in exchange for economic perks like trade deals and investments. China's been pressuring global companies and international organizations to stop treating Taiwan like a separate entity. So you see airlines or businesses being told to list Taiwan as a part of China on their website. Taiwan's relationship with China doesn't just affect themselves, it's something that the world is watching. Let's talk about US for a second. While the US doesn't officially recognize Taiwan as an independent nation, it plays a huge role in supporting Taiwanese sovereignty. And recently, in the context of the new Cold War between US and China, the US has significantly ramped up its military support for Taiwan. This includes more advanced weapon sales, defense cooperation, and naval patrols in the Taiwan Strait. The US is sending a clear message to China that it's committed to Taiwan's defense. Even though the US follows a policy of strategic ambiguity, meaning they don't openly say they defend Taiwan in a conflict, but most people agree that the US would step in if something major happened. Japan is another key player here. Any conflict in the Taiwan Strait would directly impact Japan's security, so they have been increasing their military readiness. Other countries like Australia and some European nations are also quietly showing their support for Taiwan, even though these countries don't officially recognize Taiwan, but they see Taiwan as an important partner in balancing China's growing influence. Now, what does all this matter to the rest of the world? And first, let's talk about security. Taiwan is a key piece of a first island chain, which is a string of islands stretching from Japan through Taiwan, Philippines, and down to Indonesia. This chain acts as a natural barrier to China's military and naval expansion into the Pacific. If Taiwan were fall under Chinese control, it would give China a massive strategic advantage in projecting power beyond its coast and into broader Pacific region. This would not only shift the balance of power in Asia, but also have significant implications for US and allied military strategies in the region. Additionally, Taiwan's economy plays a huge role in the global tech industry, especially when it comes to semiconductors. Taiwan produces 60% of the world's semiconductors and 90% of most advanced chips, which are used in everything from smartphones to electric vehicles to military technology. If something were to happen to Taiwan's tech production, say a military conflict or a blockade, it would send shockwaves through global economy, severely disrupting supply chains in the high-tech sector. The world is already dealing with shortage in tech, and Taiwan is a critical player in solving these issues. But it's not just about semiconductors. Taiwan Strait is one of the most important shipping routes in the world. More than half of the world's commercial shipping passes through this area every year. If China were to launch a war against Taiwan or successfully occupy the island, it wouldn't just disrupt the tech industry, it would turn the Taiwan Strait into a Chinese inland sea. This would threaten the free navigation of international waters, potentially crippling global trade routes. This would have massive consequences for countries like Japan and South Korea, both of which rely heavily on the flow of goods, energies, and resources through the Taiwan Strait. If China were to control these waters, it would pose an existential threat to their national security and economic survival. Furthermore, it would destabilize the entire Indo-Pacific region and dramatically upset strategic balance, giving China control over one of the world's most critical marine choke points. And now here's my personal view. I firmly believe that the United States will never allow its power to be pushed out of Indo-Pacific region by China. There's no way the US would sit back and let China threaten the international order by taking control of Taiwan. I'm very confident that the US will intervene militarily to protect Taiwan against China's invasion. The only reason the US hasn't made this explicit is because of a long-standing strategy called strategic ambiguity policy. Washington didn't want to be dragged into a war with China when the tensions were already high. But time changed. As China's threat against Taiwan has grown, as the Chinese Communist Party faces growing domestic challenges, it's clear that Beijing may resort to military adventurism to distract from internal problems. This growing risk is something that the US has become increasingly aware of, and we've seen the response over time. Since Obama, the US has stepped up its warning to China, strengthened the military presence in the Indo-Pacific, adopted the so-called pivot to Asia strategy, and invested in the regional alliances. Under the President Trump, we saw even more assertive measures, with the US launching a trade war and a technological sanction against China, further signaling that US won't tolerate aggressive moves that threaten the region's stability. The Biden administration has continued this approach, signaling that the days of strategic ambiguity might be numbered. And the international community is stuck in a tricky spot. On the one hand, they don't want to upset China, which is a massive global power and trading partner. But on the other hand, they want to support Taiwan's democracy and its right to self-govern, to hold China accountable for its assertive foreign policy. So countries are trying to balance these two interests without triggering a bigger crisis. Now let's talk about what we should do moving forward. And from the perspectives of geopolitics and a great power rivalry, the CCP Communist Party faces an internal governance crisis that could drive them to resort to military action against Taiwan. By doing so, they would hope to divert attention away from domestic conflicts, consolidate power, and rally nationalist support. This could escalate the new Cold War between US and China into a full-scale hot war. Right now, China's military capability have still not strong enough to fully invade and occupy Taiwan. And they are also concerned about the possible intervention from Japan and US and other nations, as well as potential for global financial sanctions. However, this doesn't mean that such a scenario is impossible in the future. So what can we do to prevent such a crisis? I have some suggestions. Firstly, we need to put maximum political and military pressure on China. The Indo-Pacific strategy led by the US and Japan has effectively created a containment around China, limiting its military expansion in the region. In addition, strengthening Taiwan's defensive capability is also crucial, as it raises the cost for China to launch attack. By making any military action too costly and risky, we can deter China from making any rash decisions. Secondly, there needs to be a decoupling of the global economy from China, reducing dependency on Chinese products, especially by encouraging multinational corporations to shift their supply chains out of mainland China to other nations like Southeast Asia, can limit China's ability to weaponize trade. If China cannot use economic leverage to coerce other nations, it weakens its hand in both geopolitical and economic disputes. And the one thing we can do on a personal level is to try to avoid buying any products made in China. I know it's probably unrealistic to avoid Chinese-made goods 100%, but at least we can try a little bit. I always check the origin of products when I shop. If there's an alternative on the shelf, I will choose something other than made in China. Lastly, we must strengthen the ideological and value-based criticism of CCP. The international community needs to recognize the nature of the CCP's rule and raise awareness about its oppressive tactics. We must also expose the lies of the Chinese Communist regime on the global stage, pointing out their misrepresentations, such as their deliberate distortion of UN Resolution 2758. Let's talk about a little bit about the Resolution 2758. CCP claims the resolution proves that Taiwan is a part of China, but the resolution only addressed the replacement of China's representation in the UN and did not touch on Taiwan's sovereignty. Furthermore, China's claim that the international community recognizes the One China principle is also false. One China principle says there's only one China in the world, and Taiwan is a part of China. However, the international community follows so-called One China policy, not One China principle. So One China policy aligns with UN Resolution 2758 by acknowledging that People's Republic of China represents China, rather than Republic of China, government based in Taiwan. This is just the first part of One China principle. However, most countries either do not address or remain ambiguous on the issue of whether Taiwan is part of China. In fact, only 51 countries in the world align with China's position on this matter, not 181, the number that China claims. Finally, I want to say that the conflict over Taiwan is no longer just a continuation of the so-called Chinese Civil War. Historically, it was a struggle between two authoritarian parties fighting for control over China. But today is different. It's a fight between democratic Taiwan and the authoritarian regime that seeks to strip 23 million Taiwanese citizens of their freedom and liberty. This isn't just an internal issue for China anymore. It's now a global ideological battle. This is no longer about the civil war. It's about the democracy versus authoritarianism. Everyone in the world who value freedom and liberty should have no hesitation about standing with Taiwan. Defense of Taiwan is a defense of basic human rights in the face of growing authoritarianism and totalitarianism threat. Okay, I'll wrap it up here, and thank you for all your time and attention today. And I'm happy to answer any questions or hear your perspectives on this matter. And also, I'm traveling to Taiwan again early next year, and feel free to drop me a line. Thank you.